dedicated to journalists whose persistence hunting the facts makes possible our democracy. In 1838, Abraham Lincoln asked his fellow Americans, "At what point shall we expect the approach of danger? By what means shall we fortify against it? Passion has helped us, but can do so no more. It will in future be our enemy. Reason, cold, calculating, unimpassioned reason, must furnish all the materials for our future support and defense. Let those materials be molded into general intelligence, sound morality, and in particular a reverence for the Constitution and laws, and that we improve to the last, that we remained free to the last, that we revered his name to the last, that during his long sleep we permitted no hostile foot to pass over or desecrate his resting place, shall be that which to learn the last trump shall awaken our Washington." Posiwid, the purpose of a system is what it does. System theorists coined an acronym to separate beguiling beliefs from real-world facts. Rather than being seduced by what a system is intended to do, they focus on what it in fact does. Posiwid, the purpose of a system is what it does. It is said that more than 90% of the diamonds sold in America are handled by the 47th Street jewelry business. On 47th Street, since much of the business is still conducted on the honor system, a man's reputation is about as valuable a commodity as the stones themselves. Up until the mid-1990s, De Beers controlled almost the entire global diamond market. As new mines opened up, however, more people were able to get into the business, and De Beers' market share has now dropped by most estimates to less than 65%. Leviev managed to outmaneuver De Beers and negotiate a deal with Angola for exclusive access to its diamond production. A multi-billionaire and an enthusiastic supporter of Jewish causes, Mr. Leviev, a native of Tashkent who now lives in Israel, is a friend of Vladimir Putin's. On June 6, 2003, federal prosecutors in New York announced the arrest of 11 jewelry dealers and others who are accused of participating in an international money laundering scheme. James B. Comey, the United States Attorney in Manhattan, said the use of the jewelers highlighted the vicious cycle of drugs to money to gold back to money that was essential for drug lords to be able to survive. Mr. Comey said, "Part of the genius of the scheme was that it avoided the banking system, where institutions have been clamping down on money laundering schemes. The big problem for drug lords is not so much getting the drugs into the United States. In some ways, a bigger challenge for them is how to get the money back so they can get rich off of it." Mr. Comey said the jewelers may not be drug lords, but they're every bit as important to the success of those drug endeavors as the dealers themselves. Some jewelers on the busy insular block of 47th Street expressed surprise yesterday at the arrest, while others shrugged their shoulders and complained that a few bad people were harming the reputation of the diamond trade. A jeweler who said he had worked on the block for 28 years and who refused to give his name expressed surprise at the arrest. He said, "They are very respectful people in the diamond industry." A jeweler standing nearby interjected, "The whole block is surprised." The two men described one of the defendants, Roman Nektilov, who prosecutors said was an owner of Roman Jewelers, as someone who had worked on the block for more than 3 decades, was often relied on for advice, and could be trusted. One of the jewelers added, "On 47th Street, everything is on the trust." In 2003, one of the new tenants of Trump World Tower was Edward Nektilov, Roman Nektilov's son. Mr. Nektilov bought a condo on the 79th floor, directly below Trump's future campaign manager, Kellyanne Conway. A month later, Mr. Nektilov sold his unit for a $500,000 profit. A diamond dealer from Uzbekistan, Edward Nektilov was being investigated by a Treasury Department task force for mob-connected money laundering. On May 20th, 2004, just after 7 p.m., Mr. Nektilov had just left his store, Roman Jewelers, at 74 West 47th Street in the Diamond District. The jeweler's nephew, David Nektilov, 22, was working with him that day. David Nektilov said, "We closed the store, and I asked him, 'Uncle Eddie, should I go to the car?' But he said, 'I'm going to a meeting. You take the subway.' The meeting was with an Israeli friend," he said. Edward Nektilov turned north, presumably walking towards the garage where he kept his car, when he was gunned down on the crowded Avenue of the Americas. In front of a Gap store and Fox News TV studios, a man dressed in black shot Mr. Nektilov 3 times at close range, once in the back of the head and twice in the back. John Doherty, 56, a retired NYPD lieutenant who was working as a security consultant at Fox News, across the street, heard the shots, and gave chase, police said. When the gunman realized he was being pursued, he brandished a weapon from his waistband and pointed it at Doherty, who was also armed. Fearful of starting a shootout on a crowded Midtown street, the ex-cop backed away, authorities said. The killer escaped into the busy, crowded streets, the police said. A witness, Jimmy Cosi, said, "He spoke nothing. Just shoot. It took just a second. Pop, 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 and he run." In a strange twist, among those racing to the crime scene with police were television stars Candice Bergen and Lorraine Bracco, who were being hosted by the police on a ride-along program. Bergen, who starred on Murphy Brown, and Bracco of The Sopranos, didn't see the shooting but arrived there shortly afterward. The New York Post said, Tony Soprano's shrink came tantalizingly close to his world yesterday, and Murphy Brown was there to catch all the action. After she saw the dead man sprawled on the 6th Avenue sidewalk, an excited Lorraine Bracco, who is better known as Dr. Jennifer Melfi in The Sopranos, told the Post, "I definitely took up the wrong profession." Ms. Bracco said, "I'm not in my right job. I know it's not PC, politically correct, but shit happens like this in New York. This should be my real profession. I love this." Ms. Bergen, who once played hard-nosed television reporter Murphy Brown, was with Deputy Inspector Peter Tuffy, the commanding officer of Midtown South, when she was whisked to the scene of the crime. "Suddenly, we're with Inspector Tuffy going 60 miles an hour, said Bergen, who, unlike Bracco, seemed taken aback by the gruesome scene. "We actually saw brains," she said from behind police lines. Ms. Bergen said, "It was certainly the first time I've seen brain matter." Both temporary commanders got to chat with the real deal when Police Commander Ray Kelly showed up to survey the scene. Edward Nektilov was taken to St. Vincent's Hospital, where he was pronounced dead. Mr. Nektilov and his father were to stand trial in July in a Diamond District gold for drugs smuggling case that has brought 8 convictions since the arrest last June. Nektilov, 46, was gunned down 2 months before he was to go on trial with his father, Roman, on federal charges that they helped launder drug money at their business, Roman Jewelry. Police investigators don't believe the unsolved killing had anything to do with the money laundering case, but they also consider it a professional hit and suspect the Russian mob was involved. The trial of the father began earlier this month and had been expected to conclude next week, but the defendant was hospitalized last week with heart problems, leaving the outcome in doubt. The 75-year-old Roman Nektilov, a diminutive Russian immigrant with a graying mustache, played an important role in the successful cycle of narcotics trafficking, prosecutor Brett Williams told jurors at the trial's outset. Edward Nektilov's lawyer has said that his client was looking forward to clearing his name and had no intention of pleading guilty or cooperating with the government. The federal case and inferences of mob connections have upset supporters of the Nektilovs, described as respected leaders in the tight-knit Bukharin Jewish community in the Queens borough. Edward's brother Leon Nektilov said, "He was a religious man. He was a man who helped people. It's like they cut off my wings, cut my legs, and took my brain away." On December 18, 2015, in response to Joe Scarborough's allegations that the Russian president kills journalists that don't agree with him, Mr. Trump said, "I think our country does plenty of killing also." December 20, 2015, in an interview with ABC's This Week, Trump again defended against allegations Mr. Putin had ordered the killings of journalists and dissidents. Mr. Trump said, "In all fairness to Putin, you're saying he killed people. I haven't seen that. I don't know that he has. Have you been able to prove that? Do you know the names of the reporters that he's killed?" According to the Committee to Protect Journalists, 42 journalists were killed in Russia from 2000 to 2019. Of those 42 people, the data indicates 26 of them were murdered. Soon after he twice refused to condemn Putin's extrajudicial killings, Donald Trump ad-libbed to students at Dordt College in Sioux Center, Iowa, that his supporters were so loyal he could stand in the middle of Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody, and I wouldn't lose any voters, okay? Mr. Trump's imagined scenario bore a striking resemblance to the 6th Avenue killing of Edward Nektilov on May 20, 2004. On May 21, 2004, Mr. Trump was presented with an honorary doctorate degree from Wagner College on Staten Island, New York.
Wagner College welcomes into the ranks of its alumni today Donald J. Trump. a New York original. Everyone knows something about him, and everyone has an opinion concerning him. He is brash, demanding, sometimes boastful, but at the same time candid, insightful, and supremely confident. Nothing second best. The Trump name is most commonly associated with superlatives. Nothing second class. Virtually all of the holdings in Mr. Trump's portfolio are described as world-class luxury developments, including the famous and historic estate Mar-a-Lago, now an ultra-luxury club. Self-promotion aside, the Trump name in the worlds of finance, construction, and real estate mean a dependable return on investment, a job that will finish ahead of time and come in under budget. But most importantly, the Trump name means superior quality. It is not just his love affair with the tallest, the largest, the best, the most luxurious, the rich and famous. It is also his disdain for sloppiness, indecision, incompetence, and plain stupidity. In his mind's eye, he's a practical, no-nonsense, straight-shooting person. He believes that the art of the deal, the title of his first and perennially best-selling book, is just that, an art. And he knows that you're measured by how much, not by how much you undertake, but by what you finally accomplish.
Thereby declare that your name forever be inscribed on the roll of Wagner College's most esteemed alumni.
Well, thank you very much. I've always wanted to be known as a doctor. And Melania, from now on, you will address me as Dr. Trump. Sure she will. Well, you're about to begin a great new journey. And you never really know where that journey will take you. Look at me. I was a very successful real estate developer in New York City, and they said, "Do you mind doing a television show?" So I said, "I guess. What the hell?" And we did it. But it became really something. And it went to the #1 show on television. So here I am, I'm a star. And there's nothing like it. It beats real estate all the time. Graduation really is just a beginning. I graduated from school. We're all a little bit nervous. We never know what's going to happen. We never know where the world is going. We're in a pretty frightening place right now. But I thought what I'd do is put down a few points so that you folks can go out and at least maybe have a guideline. Because I've lived by this guideline. And it sort of worked. We've had some little doubts every once in a while, but it's worked for me. And I always begin by saying, you have to love what you do. If you don't love it, don't do it. Don't let your parents push you into something. Don't let your girlfriend, your boyfriend. If you don't love it, don't do it. And probably you won't be very good at it if you're doing something against your will. It may not seem like the right thing at the time, but you've got to love it. Another thing, give 100% of what you've got. No matter how long we're on this planet, if we're 80, 90, or 100 years old, it's really just a speck of time. So give 100%. Just so important. Review yourself every day. How am I doing? Especially now. How am I doing? What am I doing? Am I enjoying it? Am I doing it well? Do my bosses like me? What's going on? Review yourself. See how things are going. You're going to have a lot of problems. Life is tough. In 1990, I owed billions and billions of dollars, and it seemed like there was no end. Some people would say $9.2 billion. Nobody wants to owe that much money. I slept well, but the banks didn't. The fact is, I fought, I worked, and now my company is a much bigger, stronger, more solid company than it ever was before. Much bigger than it was in the 80s, much bigger than it was in the 90s. But I never gave up. And honestly, the odds were against me. The Guinness Book of Records, other than this great recognition today, I think in its own way, I'm very honored. The Guinness Book of Records has me down as the greatest personal financial comeback of all time. Now, I don't know what that means because I just kept working. It was the same thing. The 90s weren't as good as the 80s. Then the end of the 90s were great, and now it's sort of better than that. But you just keep working. Be disciplined. Don't lose discipline. Get out there and fight for everything. Don't lose discipline. And don't live on the edge like I do. You don't need it. You want to have a nice, normal life, folks, okay? Study something every day. Learn. There's nothing like education. You know, I grew up right next to Wagner College. A lot of people don't know. They see Trump Tower and they see Fifth Avenue. I love this. My father owned a job right next door, Grimes Hill Apartments. And I would collect coins in the washing machines with my father almost every Saturday. And we'd go around collecting. On Howard, we'd just go around and collect. And there usually wasn't too much money in there, but we'd collect. And it'd say, come on, let's make the rounds. And we'd stop at Wagner College a lot. And I happen to think, and I've been to great colleges and great campuses, I happen to think that this is one of the most beautiful campuses anywhere in the United States. I really believe it. Keep the big picture in mind, but never lose sight of the details, because the details can send you down. If you lose sight of the details, they can send you down. So keep that big picture in mind. Never lose sight of the details. The second most important thing after love what you do is never, ever give up. Don't give up. Don't allow it to happen. If there's a concrete wall in front of you, go through it, go over it, go around it, but get to the other side of that wall. I have so many people that I've seen over the years, if they just fought a little bit harder, they would have made it. They would have succeeded. They would have accomplished their goal, but they gave up. Don't give up. Abraham Lincoln said, I will study and prepare, and perhaps, just perhaps, my chance will come. And that's very, very true. And just in closing, I'm going to say to you two words that I only said once on The Apprentice. You're hired. Good luck. Do well. Thank you.
2 days after Edward Nektilov was killed on 6th Avenue, May 22, 2004, Mr. Trump was the Grand Marshal of the Salute to Israel parade. Leading the marchers up 5th Avenue, he yelled, "You're fired," to cheering spectators. Mr. Trump said, in spring 2004, at the height of violence in the Gaza Strip, I was the Grand Marshal of the 40th Salute to Israel parade, the single largest gathering in support of the Jewish state. It was a very dangerous time for Israel, and frankly for anyone supporting Israel. Many people turned down this honor. I did not. I took the risk, and I'm glad I did. Judah Engelmeyer, a PR executive who served on the board of directors of the Israel Tribute Committee, which used to organize the annual event, disagreed. The Israel Day Parade is one of the most protected parades at every level of government. I don't think there was ever any concern that anyone's life would be in danger. Mr. Trump would go on to leverage the parade as proof not just of his support for Israel, but as proof of his foreign policy bona fides. Russian President Vladimir Putin condemned President Bush's decision to launch a military strike against Iraq and called for a swift end to the war. The Russian leader called the war in Iraq a big political mistake. President Putin said, "If we allow international law to be replaced by the law of the fist, then one of the main principles of international law, the principle of the inviolability of the sovereignty of states, will be thrown into question." By August 2004, Mr. Trump's and President Putin's views on Iraq had converged. Mr. Trump now said, "Look at the war in Iraq and the mess that we're in. I would never have handled it that way." Does anybody really believe that Iraq is going to be a wonderful democracy where people are going to run down to the voting box and gently put in their ballot, and the winner is happily going to step up to lead the country? Come on, 2 minutes after we leave, there's going to be a revolution, and the meanest, toughest, smartest, most vicious guy will take over, and he'll have weapons of mass destruction, which Saddam didn't have. What was the purpose of this whole thing? Hundreds and hundreds of young people killed. And what about the people coming back with no arms and legs, not to mention the other side? All those Iraqi kids who've been blown to pieces, and it turns out all of the reasons for the war were blatantly wrong. All this for nothing. Paul Klebnikov was a journalist and a historian of Russia. Mr. Klebnikov worked at Forbes magazine for more than 10 years. He was the chief editor of the Russian edition at Forbes. Paul Klebnikov's murder, July 9, 2004 in Moscow, was seen as a blow against investigative journalism in Russia. September 12, 2004, the New York Times Magazine featured the article Trumpologies by James Traub about the great revelation of The Apprentice. Donald Trump is an egomaniacal, germophobic, multi-millionaire, and yet television viewers and the folks who gather outside Trump Tower hoping for a glimpse can't get enough of him. Mr. Trump's name has become such a byword for success that even the most humiliating reverses barely dent his reputation. Reports had it that he would be forced to place the company that holds his Atlantic City hotel and casino operation into bankruptcy, and in fact, he did just that a few weeks later. Mr. Trump would have to come up with $55 million in cash to preserve his stake in the company. Did he have $55 million? Only an idiot would even ask. Of course he did. He had huge cash flow from his real estate operations. He was stronger than ever. Mr. Trump could have rescued the company with a check if he'd wanted to, but he would rather do it institutionally, with an infusion of capital from his good friends at Donaldson, Lufkin, and Jenrette. His bank, by the way. One of the remarkable things about Trump, at least from a reporter's point of view, is that he does not require an actual interview. He just starts talking, without even bothering to stand up and shake my hand. He believes shaking hands is a reckless invitation to infectious disease. Mr. Trump said, "Harvey Weinstein calls. He's a friend of mine, you know. He's the head of Miramax. And he says, 'Donald, you know you're the biggest star in Hollywood?' I say, 'What are you talking about?' He says, 'You're the number one star. You're a superstar on the number one show in television. Number 4, actually. You saved NBC. I never thought of it because the rest of the time I'm negotiating with contractors. So I said, 'You know what? It's true.' When Trump took me to the topping off ceremony at Trump Place, he demonstrated his peculiar populism. When his limo glided up to the construction site, he said to me, 'These are the people who love me, and I love them,' and it was true. As soon as Trump got out of the car, a huge roar went up, and the construction workers who had gathered to hear him began to laugh and shout, 'You're fired! You're fired!' Trump looked around and yelled, 'Where's Miss Universe?' He is also a co-owner of the Miss Universe contest. 'Did you ever see Miss Universe of Australia?' He jerked his thumb back to me. 'Hey fellas, this guy's writing for the New York Times Magazine. If he writes badly about me, will you kick the crap out of him?' Mr. Trump glad-handed everyone in sight, gave a speech in which he made fun of the sissy construction workers in Florida, dickered with a structural engineer over a bid for work on a projected skyscraper in Chicago, posed for pictures and climbed back into the limo to shouts of, 'Take it easy, Donald.' And then he took out a stingingly alcoholic hand towel and rubbed away the traces of promiscuous human contact. Maybe it's an example of what Marxists call false consciousness, but Trump really is a populist plutocrat. And not because he's philanthropic or even liberal-minded. It's the opposite. People seem to like him because he loves his money and spends it just the way they would if they had it, as if he had just won a reality show himself. Is Trump for real? Is he what he says he is on The Apprentice, the supreme artist of the deal, and the biggest developer in the toughest town? It has always seemed unjust at a cosmic level that a man could live as if he alone could defy the laws of gravity, brag about doing so, and then get away with it. Surely fate would melt his wings. Is he really worth billions? Or is he some sort of master illusionist who earns a very nice fortune by blowing gorgeous bubbles? Does he use billion as a term of art? Mr. Trump told me that Forbes magazine had calculated his net worth at $2.5 billion, though the real number, he said, was $6 billion. In fact, in its most recent profile of Mr. Trump, Fortune noted that weeks of digging into Trump's finances yielded only murk. Mr. Trump's real estate holdings are private and thus ultimately no more penetrable than he wishes them to be. On the other hand, the public company that holds his casino properties lost money for years thanks to the massive debt that Trump assumed, and now the company itself has been forced to reorganize through bankruptcy. Why should all this matter? Shouldn't we just say that Trump is really rich and that he's a really big developer? But it's Trump himself who won't let the issue lie. Mr. Trump keeps threatening to sue reporters who question his numbers. It is, in the end, a matter of brand protection. The Trump brand would probably survive a bit of legal trouble. On the other hand, his brand might be severely compromised if Trump were, say, knocked off the Forbes 500. So much of Trump's success, the premium he earns on his apartments and his golf courses, the millions he gets for the use of his name by developers in South Korea, the Trump signature collection, depends on the aura of stupendous success he projects. Mark Burnett said, "Americans want to puff out their chests right now. It's like a fuck you moment, and he's one of us." The genius of The Apprentice from a marketing perspective is that it treats Trump's supremacy as unarguable fact, thus ensuring that the viewers will do so as well. Trump may not be the living incarnation of business or even of real estate, but he has made a fortune by behaving as if he is. If there's one person who fully accepts the premise of The Apprentice, it's Donald Trump. At one point he said to me, "I feel strongly about the fact, and I don't think you've heard this before, that I consider myself to be a great builder." In November 2004, the company filed for bankruptcy protection, the third such trip for Trump's casinos. The bondholders took a $500 million loss. Mr. Trump stepped down as chief executive but remained chairman of the board and agreed to invest $55 million of his own money in the company, perhaps his first cash investment. Mr. Trump still received $2 million a year under a services agreement which included the use of his name. Shares sometimes traded below $1, but Mr. Trump said the problems had been fixed. Mr. Trump's longtime investment bankers at Donaldson, Lufkin, and Jeanrette backed out of a deal with Mr. Trump to invest in the company shortly before the bankruptcy was filed. Suing for $26 million in fees, his bankers said in court papers that the casinos would be back in bankruptcy court within 5 years because the company was still carrying too much debt. Lawyers for the investment bank said, "The Trump name does not connote high-quality amenities and first-class service in the casino industry. Rather, the Trump name is associated with the failure to pay one's debts, a company that has lost money every year, and properties in need of significant deferred maintenance and lagging behind their competitors." The dispute was later settled. David Hanlon, a veteran casino executive, said, "Mr. Trump succeeded in repeatedly convincing investors, bankers, and Wall Street that his name had real value. I have to give Trump credit for using his celebrity time and time again. They were so in love with him that they came back a second, third, and fourth time. They let him strip out assets. It was awful to watch. It was astonishing." Sebastian Pignatello, a private investor who at one time held stock in the Trump casinos worth more than $500,000, said, "He drove these companies into bankruptcy by his mismanagement, the debt, and the pillaging." People underestimated Donald Trump's ability to pillage. William R. Noje was in Ukraine during the Orange Revolution of 2004, where he was posted in Kharkov, eastern Ukraine, then to Yalta and the Crimean. In 2005, Mr. Noje was in Afghanistan to monitor elections with a delegation from the International Republican Institute. Born in the Soviet Union in 1966, Felix H. Sater immigrated with his family to Brighton Beach when he was 8 years old. At 24, he was a successful Wall Street broker. At 27, he was in prison after a bloody bar fight. And at 32, he was accused of conspiring with the mafia to launder money and defraud investors. Along the way, he became embroiled in a plan to buy anti-aircraft missiles on the black market for the Central Intelligence Agency in either Russia or Afghanistan, depending on which of his former associates is telling the story. But in recent years, Mr. Sater has resurfaced with a slightly different name and a new business card identifying him as a real estate executive based on Fifth Avenue. And although he may not be a household name, one of the people he is doing business with is Donald J. Trump. Mr. Sater, who now goes by the name Sater, has been jetting to Denver, Phoenix, Fort Lauderdale, Florida, and elsewhere since 2003, promoting potential projects in partnership with Mr. Trump and others. In New York, the company Mr. Sater works for, Bayrock Group, is a partner in the Trump Soho, a sleek 46-story glass tower condominium hotel under construction on a newly fashionable section of Spring Street. But much remains unknown about Mr. Sater, 41, and determining the truth about his past is a bit like unraveling the plot of a spy novel. Almost every character tells a different tale. A federal complaint brought against him in a 1998 money laundering and stock manipulation case was filed in secret and remains under seal. A subsequent indictment in March 2000 stemming from the same investigation described Mr. Sater as an unindicted co-conspirator and a key figure in a $40 million scheme involving 19 stockbrokers and organized crime figures from 4 mafia families. The indictment asserted that Mr. Sater helped create fraudulent stock brokerages that were used to defraud investors and launder money. Mr. Sater and his lawyer, Judd Burstein, repeatedly refused to discuss in detail his role in the stock scam. But a one-time friend, Gennady Klatsman, who is known as Gene and who has accused Mr. Sater as a co-conspirator, contends that they both pleaded guilty in 1998 and that Mr. Sater began cooperating with the authorities. Prosecutors are unwilling to discuss either the 1998 complaint or the 2000 indictment. Mr. Sater, who has an untitled position at Bayrock, said he started spelling his name as Sater to distance himself from a past in an age when anyone can look up a name on Google. Mr. Burstein added, he does not hide his past and difficulties he had from anybody he does business with. But Alex Sapir, president of the Sapir organization, a partner in Trump Soho, said he was not happy to have just learned of Mr. Sater's past on Thursday. This is all news to me, he said. Mr. Trump also said he was surprised to learn of Mr. Sater's past. We never knew that, he said of Mr. Sater. We do as much of a background check as we can on the principals. I didn't really know him very well. Mr. Trump said that most of his dealings with Bayrock had been with its founder, Tevfik Harif, and that his son Donald and his daughter Ivanka were playing active roles in managing the project. Neither Bayrock nor Mr. Trump has been accused of wrongdoing. Mr. Sater has generally kept a low profile on the Trump projects, although he mingled with guests and the owners at a September party introducing Trump Soho. Mr. Trump and Mr. Sater were also together in Loveland, Colorado in 2005, where they were interviewed by a reporter for the Rocky Mountain News about potential development deals in nearby Denver. Mr. Trump said he did not recall Mr. Sater's being there. He seemed to get along just fine, said Justin Henderson, a Denver developer who worked with Mr. Trump and Mr. Sater on an ultimately unsuccessful deal to build the tallest towers in Colorado. It seemed that Mr. Trump relied heavily on Mr. Sater's opinion on certain markets. From the mid-90s, Mr. Trump's pursuit of Russia was strengthened by a growing circle of partners and associates in Canada and the United States who had roots in the region. Among them were Tevfik Arif, Felix Sater's neighbor in Sands Point on Long Island, who founded the development company Bayrock. Mr. Arif is a former economist for the Soviet government, who built a chain of 5 luxury hotels in Turkey and Kazakhstan after the collapse of the Soviet Union. Bayrock was headquartered in Trump Tower, 2 floors below the Trump Organization. Mr. Sater said he joined Bayrock in 2003 at the urging of the company's founder, Mr. Arif. It was 2005, and Felix Sater was back in Moscow pursuing an ambitious plan to build a Trump Tower on the site of an old pencil factory along the Moscow River that would offer hotel rooms, condominiums, and commercial office space. Letters of intent had been signed, and square footage was being analyzed. Mr. Sater said there was an opportunity to explore building Trump Towers internationally, and Russia was one of those countries. While working to take Trump-branded towers to Arizona, Florida, and New York's Soho neighborhood, Bayrock also began scouting for deals in Russia and other countries. We looked at some very, very large properties in Russia, Mr. Sater said. Think of a large Vegas high-rise. Mr. Trump continued to work with Mr. Sater even after his role in a huge stock manipulation scheme involving mafia figures and Russian criminals was revealed. Mr. Sater pleaded guilty and served as a government informant. During a trip in 2006, Felix Sater and two of Mr. Trump's children, Donald Jr. and Ivanka, stayed at the historic Hotel National Moscow opposite the Kremlin, connecting with potential partners over the course of several days. Mr. Sater said their attitude could be summarized as, "Nice, big city, great, let's do a deal here." In 2007, Mr. Trump discussed a deal for a Trump International Hotel and Tower in Moscow that Bayrock had lined up with Russian investors. It would be a non-exclusive deal, so it would not have precluded me from doing other deals in Moscow, which was very important to me, Mr. Trump said in a deposition in an unsuccessful libel suit he brought against Tim O'Brien, a journalist. "We're going to do one fairly soon," Mr. Trump insisted. "Moscow will be one of the cities where we will be." In 2007, Drinks America signed a deal to export 50,000 cases of Trump vodka annually to Russia. In a news release, Mr. Trump heralded it as a tremendous achievement. From 2006 to 2008, his company applied for several trademarks in Russia, including Trump, Trump Tower, Trump International Hotel and Tower, and Trump Home, according to a record search by Soju's Patent, a Russian intellectual property firm. Mr. Trump tried and failed to start a reality show in St. Petersburg in 2008 starring a Russian mixed martial arts fighter. The vodka was sold in Russia as late as 2009, but eventually fizzled out, while real estate developments remained a constant goal.